Welcome to another episode of the Respect the Path podcast with Michele and Noel. This podcast focuses on women and all things surrounding the realities of womanhood. It is based on sound, compassionate, and tough principles shared in Michele's books and workshops. Michele continually draws from those resources because she feels the urgent need to inform women of the tools she knows that can facilitate recovery from any sorrow. Michele Noel is a seeker of light, and these podcasts are Christian-based. Michele does not believe that Christendom promotes a magic wand to cure all we must experience in mortality, but that we are responsible for how we respond to both light and darkness. Michele believes that many of us do not appreciate the innate magnificence within ourselves. She believes that we have the capacity to build joy, better mental and emotional wellness, and physical strength. We just need the tools and the knowledge to uncover those magnificent traits. Michele provides those well-tested tools and insights. The first several episodes will cover important tools vital to women who desire to rise above the horrendous struggles they currently face in these last days. These beginning episodes will be the strong foundation for further topics, so grab your pen and a notebook, keep listening, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section at michellenoelbooks.com or head over to Instagram or Facebook to join in.
Welcome to podcast number 6. We're going to talk about codependency today. We're going to take this little segment of time and try to identify what that means. And for those of you who may not know, it can be a very damaging thought pattern that is repetitive in a loved one's mind, someone who is dealing with the behaviors of an addict, whether it's a child or a loved one or a friend or a spouse. It doesn't matter. The elements of codependency will be explained here a little bit, and that'll give your information base some more fuel as we go through the other things that have to do with our train of thought when we're talking about changing the way we think, because all of this is connected. So codependent, I'm going to read from Respect the Path just a little bit, paraphrase a little bit. Codependency is a slow simmer of maladaptive behaviors that grows out of a deep need to stop another person's hurtful actions. Truthfully, the harmful behaviors do need to stop, but the methods used to coerce the change almost always include negative manipulations. All the while, the codependent keeps adding new methods of control while the hurtful behaviors keep stacking up. Each person thinks that they will be happy only when the other person stops their behaviors. So the addict and the codependent are fueling each other's frustrations. Family madness and dysfunction are the results and can go on for decades, and without help will ultimately cause generational damage. So I'm going to read just a few examples of what those behaviors are, and that seems to help quite a bit. So if you can identify some of the behaviors in your own life, and you don't have to live with a codependent to exercise these behaviors. We can learn these behaviors as children from living in families that have codependent tendencies. So this is a bucket of stuff that can be easily absorbed in the way that we cope with life. And so one of the interesting behaviors is hovering or policing the activities of another human being. Driving by the addict's favorite bar to check on the parking lot, checking devices compulsively, and making surprise visits or calls. And these can be strangely addictive to the codependent in the need to feel safe, in their complete concern for their loved one and for the happiness of the relationship. Another one is withdrawing in silence. The addict is often grateful for this method because at least it's quiet in the house, and the codependent allows the situation to smolder while sickening the soul. So these never work. Manipulating the environment to not upset the addict for fear they will act out. This is called juggling chainsaws. It never works for long and exhausts the codependent on many levels and causing dangerous frustration. The saddest part of this mindset is that the codependent will sacrifice her mental and physical health, trying to control the addictive behaviors of a sickness that has no ability to respond to such sacrifices because of the sickness of the addicted brain. And more of this is detailed out in the segments for the workshops, so we can get a clearer picture of that. But for now, another aspect of this is with the codependent will withdraw into depression with the misguided idea that the addict will sense the seriousness of the problem. The addicted mind is incapable of empathy on this level, and we need to understand that. The codependent's mind dives into dark places where fears of what if live. It's a scary place. Another behavior is shaming as a manipulative tool. This is rampant and is most harmful when used publicly. Remember, this misguided attempt to bully or intimidate are sourced in the deep need and concern for the addict, and the misunderstanding that what the addiction needs in order to have recovery. So the codependent isn't understanding recovery when they behave like this. And so educating the codependent on every level possible about addiction and about the repetitive thought patterns of codependency is vital for success in a family relationship. Another behavior is anger and rage used to convince the addict that their behavior is terribly harmful, is especially dangerous because of the adrenaline effect that these emotions have on the codependent's brain. And now we're talking about the codependent's brain goes into hyperdrive, and those kinds of chemicals in the brain can become an addictive pattern. So eventually, anger begins to bring an odd feeling of justification and relief to the codependent. And now the codependent is dabbling in a serious addictive thought pattern, so these are not healthy. Another behavior is rescuing every situation, and that's enabling the codependent. So rescuing includes jail bailouts, supplying money or reinstating privileges upon an active addict's apology, making excuses for the addict or covering for the addict in any way. And then, of course, denial shows that a desperate attempt to survive the smoldering shame, such as making excuses for the bad behavior, writing notes to cover for the addict, calling in sick. Often these behaviors will be welded down the street with manipulative sword in the future when the codependent realizes that this can't be fixed, that it can't be used. But they did use it, and they say, well, I did this for you, so you should stop your bad behavior. It never works out that way. Never works. But there's a process in codependency. And I just want to take a few minutes to just go over the process that goes on in the codependent environment. So there's sorrow and frustration and fear in the codependent mind. And it centers on the behaviors or endured abuses that compromise the family member's peace of mind. So that's a big bucket of stuff. And then the next box of explanation would say that the parent, spouse, or family member often develops unhealthy thinking patterns, which lead to unhealthy responses. These responses are meant to help the troubled family member or the addict change his or her behaviors. These are called codependent responses, such as denial, threatening, nagging, policing, bribing, controlling, enabling, and bargaining with God. That always works out well, don't you know? Consequences of codependent behaviors. Now, this is interesting. We become trapped, entwined, and emotionally connected to the progress of the loved one. A bond between how we think the loved one is progressing or healing and our mental and emotional peace becomes unhealthy. This is a powerful, progressive pain mind thought pattern. So there's such an entwining of the behavior of the addict with the well-being of the family member or the happiness level. In other words, I'll be happy when the addict stops that behavior. I'll be happy when recovery happens, or I'll only be happy when all recovery is well in place. So there's no level in between. It's either sadness or happiness, depending on the behavior of the addict. And that is incredibly controlling and sad for the codependent because it's never successful. it never works out. So you have a shadow solution and you have a light solution. And we'll talk about the shadow solution and what that leads to. Seek relief through advanced codependent behaviors. In other words, more and more controlling, more and more policing, more and more crying, more and more rage. And those don't work well. And then the codependent becomes high risk in using soothing coping behaviors themselves. And so they are very high risk for overeating or spending or shopping and gaming or even drugs or pornography themselves to soothe themselves. And so it becomes a horrible place and a terrible family function, which does not lead to recovery at all. So both parties, the addict and the codependent, need to find recovery, and that's found in 12 steps and all of the other things that follow recovery. There is a light-centered solution, which includes 12 steps in some kind of family or woman support, detaching with love, that's a tool, thought control practice, that's a fantastic tool, proper boundaries. We cannot have recovery from codependence without proper boundaries. And I go into absolute detail in the workshop segments because that is an absolute learned skill, and it is fantastic. We have to learn to let go and to let God. And so those things bring light into the process of healing for the whole family. When the codependent realizes that she or he needs to be in these types of light-centered solutions so that the family can have health and peace. Doesn't happen any other way. So codependency has been dismissed as too broad in the professional world of psychology for years and years because it's difficult to define. And that world of psychology loves tidy little pigeonholes where they can put their diagnosis and prognosis into tight little places. But codependency doesn't fit that very well. So they break it up into other things, and they haven't cooperated with the realities of codependency until the last 15 years or so. But prior to that, it was a battle. And I remember that battle. When we focus on our recovery, we never use the co-addict mindset. We never accuse the codependent of causing the addiction, even though they have repetitive thought patterns. And I've talked about that in previous podcasts. But when I was in recovery, I realized that I had adapted codependent behaviors from my family. My mother was a codependent and had no tools whatsoever to heal with, no information. And when I was first married, there was absolutely no help, no way for us to plow through any kind of recovery. We had sometimes wise bishops and sometimes wise family members that if we felt that we could trust them, we would talk to them. But what in reality it all comes down to is understanding that if I have these behaviors towards any other person, these kind of controlling behaviors, then I'm in trouble with codependency. And the first step, of course, is admitting the truth, being honest, step one, and owning that behavior. And when that happens, everything becomes easier because we now have a enormous amount of information, enormous amount of help. It isn't the terrible struggle that it used to be. So the common thread in all of this is that we both, the addict and the codependent, carry a massive load of repetitive negative thought patterns. And one can be an addict. I was a opioid addict for 10 years and a codependent, raging codependent at the same time. And this happens all the time. And I rarely see an addict that isn't a codependent because they see that kind of behavior mirrored to them all of the time, and often from those that are beloved, their parents. And so they adapt these kinds of attitudes also, and it becomes this quagmire of awful thought patterns. But the recovery steps are similar for addiction and codependency. Even though the recoveries may vary a little bit, the steps are extremely similar. I know that we can learn codependency, personality, and coping traits from those who raised us as children. I believe that's how I did, and I'm positive that I passed on these traits to my children. Still, I know that recovery brings with it the broad reach of the Savior's atonement, the light of the gods, which includes the ruins of my codependent and addicted mothering. So I have a room full of mother guilt that I could share constantly. But what I have learned is that in recovery, we let go of those things and send them back into the dark abyss where they belong and use light in our lives to build new relationships. And that's what we do. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful. So codependents have their brand of repetitive thought patterns, which are somewhat different from the active addict's thought patterns, but both flavors of thought patterns often exist in the same person at the same time. I have personal experience with this particular type of insanity. So, codependency collides with the spirit mind because it is dishonest and a fruitless paradigm. Codependent behaviors never bear fruit because they are hurting ourselves and trying to manipulate the agency of another, and that never works. In our Christian paradigm, recovery for the addict comes only through a firm connection with the light of the gods. And this is, of course, our platform for recovery for anything. We have codependent behaviors at play in us. We have addictive thought patterns in play in us. And what is the answer? The answer is recovery. The answer is researching a 12-step program that is productive and fruitful and helpful, and researching the thought work that will help us to change the way we think, and learning every single one of the tools of recovery. And that's where the joy of recovery begins. If we will embrace the idea within our paradigms, and they're open enough for us to embrace every single tool available to us, now we have joy in recovery, and the relationship between the codependent and the addict can become safer and healthier, even at the very beginning of recovery. We don't have to wait for 5 years down the road where we think everybody's brains are healed. We take this path together, and we hope that the marriage or the relationship or the friendship survives, but it will if we use the tools, and that recovery is the focus for each individual. These things happen all the time. All the time recovery is successful. Every day and every week that the recovering couple or the recovering friendship continues, even though there may be slips along the way or misunderstandings, the trust gets built back when both parties are in recovery, and they even can develop a thinking and speech language that is so healthy, where they're using the same language in their everyday lives that is peace-giving, because they know what they're trying to communicate within this realm of recovery. This is a beautiful place to be, with the opposite negative view being dysfunction and divorce and chaos for everyone involved. And so I promote the saving of marriages. I promote the saving of relationships and friendships and parental and child relationships, because I know how recovery works in families and in the minds of individuals. And once we're in that place of honesty, we can move forward toward the lights of the universe, the lights of the God, the lights of our Savior. Everything in life can change. I have seen it thousands of times. And we need to trust that we have in us the magnificence to start that journey. I know these things, and I hope that you can come to know them, and that you will have hope in your own relationships. And that's all the time we have for today. And thank you for joining us, and join us again. This is Michele Noel. Have a great day.